your webinar, bro. This is your boy's webinar, bro.
Okay, good afternoon to you all, dear teachers and assistants. My name is David Paul. I'll be the presenter today, and I'll be companioned by Giancarlo Sanchez, who is on our uh, pedagogical assistance and former here in our country, and as well by Sandra Torres. As you may know, it's 3:33. We'll give a few teacher a couple of more minutes so they can join us, and then we'll go ahead. So please be there, and we'll start in around 6 minutes. Okay, so as we told before, we're about to start a webinar. So we're really happy to have you here on today's webinar session. On behalf of the University of Data and Publishing, we're happy to have you here during this afternoon. We know we've been having rough days during this quarantine, but well, we'll bring you here a couple of series of webinars. We can help you out with some strategies right now, teaching online, and definitely reducing our this anxiety that you might be feeling or your students might be feeling as well. For you to know, it will be here today with us Giancarlo Sanchez and Sandra Torres. They're UDP colleagues here in our country in Colombia. So how are you, Giancarlo?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm pretty fine, and I'm glad to be here today at this level question webinar with you, and I'll be here to assist and join in the conversation.
That's great. That sounds good. And how about you, Sandra?
Hi, David. Hi, Giancarlo, and hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to having you here chatting with us this space. The idea is that we learned a lot today during this afternoon, that we can share ideas about what you know and about what we want to share with you. So let's start, I think.
Yeah, thank you, guys. For you to know, on the right side on your screen, you might be writing down all the questions that you may go having through the webinar. And our specialist will be they will gladly assist you with the question. And by the end, we'll have a brief space to share some information about some questions that you may have. All right. So, as we were saying, today topic is leveled questions. And when we talk about level questions, definitely will have to be including the TESOL standards and some of these strategies. And this is it. We'll have three webinar series. The first one is today, which is leveled questions, which is today, Tuesday, May 12th. And the next one is communication games, Friday, May 15th. And finally, we'll have collaborative reading, which is Tuesday, May 19th. And as you may see on the top, we have strategies for supporting student involvement, which is pretty much our main goal, to give you a couple of strategies to make it work these days. Because we know that as teachers would want to get our job on some, let's say, technical job where the teacher's role is simply to give content and context, but to make it a little bit different and deliver something extra. And that extra that we're talking about is definitely going to be related with lower that anxiety in our students or in ourselves, and as well to get this quarantine in a non-stressful situation. We definitely will have a better output and a better comprehensible input in content for our students. And definitely all of these that we've been talking about will be ensuring active participation by all students, and we can guarantee that. Well, if we talk about leveled questions, we have to refer to TESOL standards. And TESOL standards, for you to know, they have goals and they have standards to accomplish. And if you may have the chance to check it at tesol.org.co, you may find all the standards for areas from pre-K to 12, and as well for colleges, which are aligned with the Common European Framework. And your students may achieve them, and you as teachers may achieve them as well. Because we as teachers, we have goals to achieve during our careers, or to meet some minimum requirements to be teaching the content daily to our students on some areas. Well, the goal for today is to use English to achieve academically in all content areas. And when we refer to all content areas, we're not talking about all these. Maybe we may be including CLIL, like content language integrated learning, but not for these bilingual schools like what students see math and science and stuff. Right? So remember that TESOL is the teaching English to speakers of other languages. So this will perfectly apply for all these kind of schools who are working with our textbooks, and we'll have the chance to enjoy all these strategies. A standard one for today is student will use English to interact in the classroom. And a standard two will be to use English to obtain, process, construct, and provide subject matter information in spoken and written form. And this may sound a little bit complex and far or isolated from our classroom and our reality, but we'll find out how Quinn adapted quickly adapted, sorry, to our real life. And before we start, I'd like to share with you this image that I found, and this is the Cummings Quadrant. And when you see the Cummings Quadrant, you'll find that there are some undemanding language and some demanding language. And this is a good thing to recognize before we get in the classroom or when we're planning our classes. Because as you might find over there, we have four axes, yeah? And if you see it here in the left app side on the screen, we have this cognitively undemanding language, which is related with the basic interpersonal and communication skills. So this part on the top will be the part which is more enjoyable for the student, and it's got to be a little bit easy for him because they will have social conversation with gestures, they have storytelling with props, they may enjoy a social phone call or a note left on the refrigerator, which is a context where the student is always involved and stuff. And then here is the tricky part in the lower side, where is the cognitive academic language proficiency, which is our hard stuff to teach. Why? Because we have math lessons that are included, and definitely when we use math lessons, we have to use manipulatives. And those teachers will have the chance to use geography lessons. They will use maps, but at the end, if you see the other X right here, right down side of the screen, you'll find the social studies lecture and the multiple choice test. And we refer to multiple choice test to all these international exam and standards to prove our students' proficiency in the language. So it's a great way to keep this in our minds before we get into class. Now, this is all. This will be our agenda today. We'll be really brief, and we'll get by the end some examples. So this is the step by step for today. If we want to have leveled questions in our classrooms, we'll definitely will have to do observing and documenting students' language levels, and we'll see how to do that. Then we'll have to be choosing and gathering materials to after planning a hierarchy of questions, which is our related topic today, level questions, to give appropriate questions and not the ones that we usually use or repetitive questions that students are used to listen to, but the right ones. Then we're going to check how to involve our students. And finally, we'll see some assessing student progress and understanding to really prove that this strategy may work with some applications and examples. And when we talk about application and examples, we'll see some behaviors related to TESOL standards again. All right? Okay, so far so good. Let's start. Leveled questions. What do I need to use them? What do you think, Giancarlo? What do you need to use level questions? What do you think?
Well, I think the user, first of all, before even talking about level questions, I think one question that is important to consider is why we use questions in the classroom. And I believe that using questions in the classroom is something that we as teachers do in order to provoke students and to generate students the need to participate, the need to speak, the need to generate ideas or to reflect about problems or situations that they might have something to say. So leveling the questions, I think it's appropriate in order for us to make sure that these type of questions that we are giving them in the classroom somehow, ground at the level of language as language users that they are, that will definitely meet the goal of having a provoking them to speak in the real terms.
That's true. That's true. And when you refer to concepts and what we use them for, we have to see what do I need to use them? How can I start to include them in my classroom? Well, the first part is to adapt the way you ask questions to your students. And this is a good part to question yourself and remind or recall the kind of typical questions you're using in your classrooms. And as far as I remember, when I was in my classroom, I was always saying, "Do you have questions? Is it clear? Do you understand?" And they come really repetitive all in every class that I was given. But when I observe and note how they interact in English, I found that these questions were not really useful for my students, and that they were like open questions that were not leading me to have any goal or any point in my classroom. Well, the good part is that you can adjust your questions to assure students answering, and as Giancarlo was saying, to motivate them to answer, to have motivation. And you know that a kid in their classroom, before it was hard to motivate them, so it'll be a little bit harder here today or on online classes. And if you're teaching now during the morning and you may recall, and if I were one of your students and you asked me, do you have any questions? Well, there's not a really motivation for me to be in the class. Yeah, so we'll have to adjust them and we'll see how to do that. Then we'll need to provide enough context in the question. And when we talk about providing enough context, we'll refer to unlock vocabulary for your student before reaching the topic, and not maybe showing the goals straight away when they get in the class. Because we as teachers we usually start our classes showing our students the goals to achieve in the beginning of it. And that's a good strategy. We're not saying it's not correct, but sometimes it's good enough to start in a different way. So the student will be a little bit more relaxed and so anxiety will be lower, and they'll have probably more will, or yeah, they'll be willing to learn in a better way. And definitely, if you provide context and you have enough knowledge about your student, the understanding and confidence will be increased. And yes, then we will have this part here where our students maybe will feel a little bit frustrated. But our idea is that we are about to help you there to reach that confidence with your students and understanding. All right, let's start. Step by step. This is how you can create the observing and documented students' language levels. And we include here all these multi-ability levels to skills during your classes, which is something that happens frequently happens in our classrooms. So you may have students which are in an A1 or an A2 level, and other ones in B1 or B2, and that make it difficult to work in our classroom. So it's really important to observe and document. When you do so, we'll find four things or four stages. We'll find that we got students in the pre-production stage. We got another ones in the early production stage. We have the next ones in the speech emergent stage. And finally, or not finally, but in the end of these goals or TESOL standards, the intermediate fluency stage. All right. So you may be saying, well, what are the advanced students? Well, they are further than this level, and they are beyond this goal two in TESOL standards, or we saw when we were beginning the presentation. They are beyond that, so that's why they're not included here. All right. So let's start to see every step to see how it works. Well, this is our appropriate expectations, sorry, for students. And we will have students at different speech stages, as we were saying before. We have the pre-production stage, and when we talk about it, we have students will be nodding, pointing, or physically demonstrating something. And this is something really important maybe for preschoolers, where kids are just in the early learning stage. They still learning how to speak the native language, and learning a second language is a little bit challenging and definitely harder for them. So, well, it's good appropriate to know the nodding and pointing is something, all right? And we have to appreciate that, because if they nod or point, is because they understand. Then we have the early production. And when we talk about early production, we have this kind of students which answer with one or two word responses, and they make choices from given language samples, all right? And questions samples will be like, is it a whale or a dolphin? Is it black or white? Is it big or small? And so on. So your early production student might be this kind of student who is still learning and is a little bit more relaxed about the language because he's got more tools. And for you to know, this pre-production and early production part are the mainly important parts in your scaffolding for your students when they're learning, all right? And remember that if your scaffolding, sorry, is solid, then the next stage, which is the speech emergence, will be a lot more consolidated. What does a student do when is in the speech emergence stage? Well, they give phrase or short sentences, okay? And your students and we're teachers, we're not perfect. So we may expect grammar errors, definitely, and that's fine. Learning language is including these grammar errors, and not only grammar errors, but maybe pronunciation errors, intonation errors, and so on. And by the end, we'll have our intermediate fluency. And at this stage, our students will be giving us longer sentences and fewer grammar errors, but we'll still have mistakes, as we always do as language learners. Now, as you may have seen so far, we've checked till now all the student stages, but now we have to think about what kind of questions can I produce, or can I make in my classroom to get my students to do this, to give me something. All right? Well, here it is. We can give questions or cues. Okay? And here are the main parts. Pre-production stage, we can say, show me which of this. And I'm pretty sure we ask one of your students, show me your pen, show me your book. Even though we do it online, they can do it. They can show it to you. They can point at somewhere on the screen. All right. If you are in the early production part, we can make this kind of questions. Is it the black one or the white one? And this kind of questions can be answered with one or two words. Yes, no, I don't understand perfectly. Yeah, that might be one of the answers. I don't understand. But even though they don't understand it, it's a good way because they understand that they don't understand. So I know it's a little bit tricky and confusing to say that a student don't understand. Well, they do it. You just didn't know the answer. We'll have the speech emergence stage, and the kind of questions here will be kind of questions like, did this happen at the beginning or at the end? What happened next? Where did you find the answer? And I'm pretty sure the US teachers might be thinking now that this type of questions will be like for reading. Students will be reading something, but they may be included, even though in speaking activities or listening activities, or in daily questions in their daily lives, like routines and stuff. And it will allow our students to give us a little bit more and to definitely increase those and enhance those skills in the classroom, or well, nowadays in our online classrooms. Then we got the intermediate fluency, and the kind of questions we do there as teachers, or we should do there, is how did you find this? How did you get that information? Or what was the character trying to do? And as you may find, this is closely linked to all these Bloom's taxonomy and several more, where you start using different verbs to describe the student advance in the language. And by the end of the session, I will send to you a PDF where are included several verbs and expressions with these stages. So this is just 2 or 3 examples from them, but by the end of the session, you will have a lot more. Well, our next part is to choose our materials, choosing and gathering materials. And when we do so, we have to be using visuals, artifacts, gestures, presentations, and support materials. And this is definitely something we do need to take care about because we usually as teachers we fall down some in routines like planning our classes and basically contents and grammatical contents and then we include meta language, which is very important for us sometimes. But definitely visuals, artifacts, and gestures will be a really good resource, and I'd say a lot more effective to teach our students nowadays. Now you might be thinking, well, what do I use visual gestures and presentations for? Well, definitely with a visual, with an artifact, you can clear your meaning, and that's something important because you clear your meaning not always when English is limited, right? Then if your students' English is limited, they'll need a lot of support like this, and even more now that we do it online. But even though their English is not limited, well, it works as well. Yeah, it might be not so basic, but trust me that including a photograph, a good photograph, from you is even better than going straight in a text. Now, when you do that, learners will feel more comfortable, and establishing a good rapport with your students uh, is the best way to reach a good language learning because they'll feel, as we said, comfortable and relaxed, and maybe they might be enjoying in a better way what we're teaching them, and they'll be willing to learn. And definitely, you know that an image speaks better than 100 words and 1,000 words. Sorry. So if you use a visual or an artifact, trust me, it will demonstrate 1,000 more ways that they understand how to explain things. Now, this is a little bit about planning a hierarchy of questions. And when we say planning a hierarchy of questions, then we will have to refer to use some learner's level of understanding, which is in the central part, and avoid hesitation and confusion. That's why we need to have a variety of questions. And when we talk about avoid hesitation and confusion, we definitely need to be thinking about what are my students thinking in that moment. What are my students getting in when I'm making that question or when I'm introducing that topic? Are they hesitating about the questions? Are they confused? Or did they fully understand my rules and my instructions? That is directly linked with the learner's level of understanding. So if you if your learner level of understanding is a little bit low, and they're just beginning to get in touch with the language, they're definitely gonna be confused and definitely gotta be hesitating about all the questions you're making them. But it will be really helpful if you make really, really easy questions, like the ones that we saw a couple of slides before, like show me, point me, etc., etc. Now, here are a couple of hierarchy of questions when we talk about these stages. So for the pre-production, we do know that our students may be willing to point. That could happen with preschoolers, or even though with students at high school, like 10, 11, or 11th graders, where they do have the chance to be doing on answering a different way, but their English level might be a little bit limited. So now, as I was saying, pre-production is 10 and pointing, and here's a basic example. Show me which of this. Now, the early production is like 1 or 2 word responses, like the one we saw before. The short sentences, like this is happened at the beginning or the end. Longer sentences, we have things like what was the character trying to do? How did you get that information, and so on. So this sketch that is just being displayed here on the screen might be really, really helpful for you in these classrooms, in your classroom, sorry, to fully identify where are your students located and how can you help them to enhance their skills in a faster way. Remember that if we as teachers we don't measure our student advance, then we'll face something which is going to be always repetitive. And when maybe our colleagues or parents will ask us about how is the student progress going, then we'll have no answer to give. Now, here's how we will involve all our students. We can have a student checklist with different speech levels. And this might sound a little bit hard and unrealistic to say, okay, I have 30, 35 students in my classroom. How am I going to have a checklist for each one of them? Well, it's not really complicated. You can define these skills using discussion and questioning and adapting the level of questions. But when we basically see the student checklist, sorry, when we see where we're saying the student checklist, we can define these stages. All right. So we can say, all right, this is my student number one. He's in the pre-production stage. So I can prepare my class and divide it to ask them questions per day. So let's say you have 30 students. So each day you can choose 5 to 6 students to include them and design appropriate leveled questions for them so they can feel like they're part of a class and they can give responses and answers to the teacher's needs. Now, when we do this discussion and questioning with your students, that definitely will develop a lot more trust between you and your class. Your students are always aware that they're being evaluated, and this is something a little bit hurtful for them, if we can say so. But you teachers can develop questions for them, definitely adapting the level of questions. And this definitely is going to be reflected in the language acquisition levels. Now, if we talk about the assessing student progress and understanding, we have these three things. Number one is are the observation purposes. And if you observe students each class, do it a few. It's not possible to observe all of your students in a class and definitely decide which strategies is going to be working for them for all of your 30 students in one class. So you can start maybe with 5, 6, all right? And then you can have examples of verbal responses. And when we talk about verbal responses, we'll include all these which are repetitive. And this is a good way to discover that maybe our student is in the pre-production stage, but he's lacking a little bit of vocab. Or maybe that our student is in the speech emerging stage, but he's lacking some of the structures to fully engage in communication. So this is going to really help us. Now, if we observe as teachers, we need to document our observations, and this is going to be determined by the periodic growth. And how can we do it? Well, we can divide it into abilities, vocabularies, and how they respond questions in class. And the answers they gave us is going to be a good chart to make a comparison to have the advanced. Yeah, and that's why I wrote that at the end of this part here. Any advanced, because every time we ask our students something, they'll have to be including something better and to be challenged to make a better effort and not to be in this isolated area where they feel comfortable, but to be challenged. And definitely, please do not forget about meeting the TESOL standards and goals because they're related to students' interaction and academic language. So sometimes we as teachers, we do know our students. We may have some observations and documenting, but the real thing is that we have to be adapting to TESOL standards, no matter what the circumstances are. If we adapt to TESOL standards and the Common European Framework, we'll be over expecting a better results according to your strategy in the classroom. Now, here are some applications and examples for you to know, because this is the good part. So as I told you in the beginning of this area, this is for all curricular areas, and I'm sorry for the mistake here, the misspelling. And when we talk about curricular areas, we'll talk about CLIL. And here are some examples for pre-K to through graders students. Respond to questions appropriate to their level on English language development, or to demonstrate understanding by physical and oral responses. And I'm pretty sure that many of you may have included these two goals or two standards in your planations. But how can we measure in your planning, sorry? But how can we make sure that we're achieving them? How can we sure that our students are demonstrating this? Yeah, so it's a good way to start just checking this for our pre-K to third graders. Now we got our 4 to 8 students, and if we do that with them, then they will ask clarification questions and they will demonstrate understanding through physical, verbal, and written replies. And please do not be so strict when we talk about written replies because they might be writing really simple stuff like yes, no, or maybe, or I can't, or maybe we can do just doing a tick or a cross according to the question. So these written replies where they might be from basic to intermediate level as well. Then we have our 9 to 12 students. And if you are a teacher in these grades, so you can, with your students, they will be able to select, connect, and explain information. Or they can represent information visually and interpret the visual representation orally. So as far as you may see here, your students are a lot more or have a lot more skills developed, we may say so, and I have maybe a lot more vocabulary and a lot more skills and abilities to fully respond to your requirements. But remember, uh, this these goals that you see here, they are related in all the stages. So we can have one of your students who select, connect, and explain information, but he's still at the speech emergence stage. So do not push them because they have to be accomplishing this according to each stage. Well, I did for you one example about application, and this application is going to be for second graders, and the topic lesson or the lesson topic is about learning the numbers. But before we begin, Giancarlo and Sandra, do we have any questions in our chat maybe before we go with the application process?
No, David, we don't have any questions at this moment.
Great. So we'll keep going ahead to have all of our 4 stages related with second graders and this lesson topic. And here is the pre-production stage. You as teacher can say it in the classroom or here in the online teaching stuff, we can say, show me 6. And your student, he might be counting 6 blocks or 6 pencils or 6 books or whatever the object is he's got at home. Yeah. So as you might see here, the instruction was show me 6, but your student might be counting, not showing, but counting. And yes, you can give an affirmative answer and say yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You showed me 6, or you counted me 6, which is a good way to reinforce all this positive feedback they give to your students, which is always an advised to be always positive, to keep them encouraging, to keep continuing learning the language. Now we got the early production part, and if you are in the same grade, second graders, learning the numbers, so we can say how many are in the screen. So maybe you, before your class, during your planning, you made a presentation or you have a visual artifact with things on the screen. And you can ask your student, how many are in the screen? Like the ones you see here. So your student might say, okay, I found 6 or 10 or 12. And this is a good way to encourage collaborative work because if your students in the early production is still having a similar question as the pre-production, then you can have help from your students in the speech emergence part and make this question, which is the number for 2 red blocks and 4 green blocks, right? So we're including CLIL, yes, definitely. We're using math. Are we using English? Yes, we are. And as far as you may see, we're now including colors. So we're increasing the level of our understanding from our students in the speech emerging levels. And if you take a close look at the intermediate fluency, we can not make a question, but we can ask our student, tell a story of two pigs joining a group of four pigs in a farm. And yes, I'm sure that pigs are not related with blocks, but if your student has the ability to have more vocab or more strategies or more structures, we as teachers must give them the chance to express themselves as they want to and use all the knowledge they have so they don't feel frustrated in class. And all of this that we just saw here, all these stages, an example should be followed by the next. Number one, always a brief modeling of language. And that's something important because after your student answered, it's a good way to correct him and give him some feedback, but in an appropriate way. And when we said appropriate, then we'll have to choose if we made a delayed error correction or if we do an spot error correction. And a good example for it is the one we got here in the pre-production stage. This student said six, he counted on 6 blocks, but the teacher modeled and gave a good feedback, including some grammar that he is not still aware of, but it's being here, which is the simple past. You showed me 6. Then a good a good thing to include at is a scaffold language for your learners. So please make sure that your students get the enough vocabulary for each lesson. We know sometimes planning takes some time, but we have to be ready for those questions we may come up in the class and be ready for these problems. I have the correct answer. So a good way to do this is to try to recreate the class and try to think the possible problems we may come up and write down a possible answers. Uh, it has worked for me in the past and has given me a chance to better handle these kind of situations in the classroom or with my students. And finally, which is quite important, please be aware about using CCQs and ICQs. And CCQs stand for concept checking questions, and ICQ for instruction checking questions. So we have to make a big difference there to make our students clear, or better, we as teachers clear, is that if we want to know if our student understand the content or the concept, we have to use CCQs. And if we want to check if our student understood instruction, then that's when we use instruction checking questions. So maybe it's a good read to have later, or maybe in one of our next webinars where we can fully go deeper in this topic. Well, some conclusions before we go, and here are the following. If you apply these strategies in your classroom, definitely your students become more fully engaged. And that's something which really happens. Uh, I talk from my personal experience, and when I was in the classroom, I started using it. And when I try to personalize my context to my students and to ask the right questions, which are called leveled questions, they definitely were a lot more full engaged. Next, their participation supports their understanding. So if they can answer what you ask, trust me, they'll understand better. Now it will their self confidence, sorry, and language increases, and that's something that we should be aware of as teachers. If you ask your students something they know, and to make them feel self confident is always increasing in every question you make them, the language is going to be increasing because your student always will be willing to keep learning and get all what you teach him. And finally, it will help you with the reduction of classroom management. And you might be thinking, how am I going to be reducing my classroom management? If I have to make observations and annotation from every student. Well, I know it's a big challenge and it's a big job, but this strategy, after you got it organized and settled, it'll definitely reduce your classroom management. Why? and it's simple. You know your students. You know how to treat them. You know how to introduce the topics, and definitely you know how to develop in an appropriate way. All right. And well, I do want to thank you guys for being here today. It was our first webinar part. We thank you to all of our citizens. And if you want to get to know a little bit more about the topic and stuff, here's a little bit about the reference. It was based on Christian and Turrell from 1983, and the book is called The Natural Approach: Language Acquisition in the Classroom. So you get made the chance to check it on the web, to keep going and never stop learning. I do want to thank Giancarlo and Sandra for being here with me. And before we go, we'll like to have a couple of minutes to see if we got some answers to questions. So, Giancarlo and Sandra, do we have any questions or doubts from our participants?
Not at the moment, David, but we can get any questions. I don't know if we can share our emails in case they have any. I'm gonna write them down real quick. So in case they have any questions regarding the topic, they can write us, and we will gladly answer to their questions.
That's true. So right now, my friend Giancarlo's writing down the mails for you. So feel free to reach us to talk about this topic and any others. And we got the info. We'll be always available to help you and to share this information and knowledge with you. For you to know, these webinars will count with the participation of teachers from several countries, which really enrich these kind of sessions because we don't know that all this quarantine and COVID-19 experience is being a little bit hard, but we're learning from all the teachers around the world. And we're planning to include all the strategies we all use in our classrooms to have better classes and better contents as well I too. All right. So well, this has been for today. Thank you so much for assisting. I will end up the presentation now. But if you still have any questions on stuff, you can write down in the chat. I will be here for you from 10 to 15 minutes for you to come up with the answers. Thank you so much, and please do not forget next Friday, which is Friday 15th at 3:30, we will continue with these strategies or for student involvement in the classroom. So please do not miss the next one, which is communication games. Thank you, Giancarlo. Thank you, Sandra. Meet you on Friday.
Thank you, David. I'll see you on Friday, and thank you all for assisting today.